All right, well, thank you all very much for reassembling fairly promptly. We're going to have our next session on maritime security. To moderate the session, we're very pleased to have Rob Margetta from Congressional Quarterly. Rob is Associate Editor of Congressional Quarterly's Homeland Security website. He has served as a Homeland Security reporter for CQ since 2007, focusing on Coast Guard affairs, legislation, the federal budget, border security, air travel, science and technology, and the security industry generally. Prior to joining Congressional Quarterly, Rob worked as a crime reporter in Massachusetts. He received a BA degree from the College of William & Mary and an MSL degree from Georgetown Law School. Thank you very much, Rob. Looking forward to the panel.
Thank you. Well, this is a great topic because maritime security is a huge piece of the Homeland Security picture that often may not get as much attention as aviation security. It is multi-mission, everything from preventing WMD from arriving at, weapons of mass destruction from arriving at U.S. shores, disrupting drug trafficking, and intercepting terrorist travel. It's also multi-agency at DHS involving Customs and Border Protection and the Coast Guard, among others. It's multi-department considering its international aspects. And it's expanding every day as the federal government turns its attention from simply looking at what's brought into the United States to following things up the supply chain to the manufacturing sector. And I was actually very pleased when I saw the makeup of this panel because it really gets into the maritime security intersection of government work and private industry. And to that end, we have Todd Owen, who is head of the cargo security programs at Customs and Border Protection. We have Chris Cook, President and CEO of the, I want to make sure I get this right, World Shipping Council. And we have Kurt Nagel, President and CEO of the American Association of Port Authorities. And I'm going to ask Todd to start.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak with you this morning a little bit about the cargo security strategies that U.S. Customs and Border Protection has in place at our ports of entry as well as international. To set the context a little bit here, every day 62,000 maritime, truck, and rail containers cross our borders. That's about 21 million a year, and that's about 4 or 5 million less than where we were at our peak a few years back when the economy was more stable. So 62,000 containers that are coming into the United States every day that could pose some sort of risk. To address the risk and to mitigate that risk, U.S. Customs and Border Protection employs a layered risk cargo security strategy, complementary layers which help us assess if that shipment poses a danger to the United States, and if so, what action should we take. The layered strategy that we have begins with the receipt of advanced information. We receive advanced cargo manifest information, and in some cases additional information on every piece of cargo that's coming into the United States before that cargo arrives at our shores. With that information, we have some targeting systems that help us assess the risk that is posed. We set those containers, those shipments up for inspection that pose the greatest risk. We have industry partnerships. We have partnerships with our foreign countries, international partnerships, which allow us to inspect the highest risk containers overseas as part of our Container Security Initiative and our Secure Freight Initiative, which deals with the 100% scanning that we'll be talking of in just a few moments. We also have our industry partnerships, our Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism, our CTPAT program, where we have voluntary participation from importers, from shippers, from customs brokers that help us secure the supply chain from the point of stuffing forward all the way through arrival in the United States. If an inspection is required, whether it's overseas or at our U.S. ports of arrival, we have a full complement of inspection technology, large-scale imaging systems that allow us to see inside the containers, as well as radiation scanning equipment to make sure there are no radiological threats that are posed by that container. So we have quite an array of technology that's available at our ports. It helps complements the strategy that we have in place to deal with the risk. Over the years, as we put these measures in place post 9/11, each of these various programs have matured in different ways. The means to achieve the objectives may have changed over time, but the objectives remain the same, and that is to help secure the country and keep bad things and bad cargo from arriving at our shores. So I look forward to the discussion this morning.
Thank you. Chris?
Thanks, Rob. The maritime industry is really a multifaceted industry. And we will talk a lot, I'm sure, about containers and cargo. But it's also important to point out there are different sectors of the industry. There's the cruise ship industry, there's the passenger vessels, there's the ferries up in Washington State, LNG vessels, tank vessels. My organization represents the container ship operators, which I'll be happy to talk about. Liner shipping, container shipping really has facilitated global trade. 60% of the value of ocean-borne commerce moves in containers. And that's one of the reasons it gets as much focus as it does. Also because obviously with a sealed container, there's a certain mystery about, okay, what it actually is in the box? Is it actually what's been declared? The objective the industry has had in all this is to try to work as closely as possible with the Coast Guard and with CBP so that the government knows what's on the ship and who's on the ship well before it gets here. As Todd explained, we give the government all the information we have on the cargo 24 hours before it's loaded in the foreign port on the ship coming to the U.S., with the whole strategy being risk assessment at that time. If there's a serious question, address it before it's even put on the ship. When the ship leaves that foreign port, there's a requirement, notices of arrival sent to the Coast Guard and CBP. It tells who the crew is. All of them must have visas if they're going to get off a ship in the U.S. It tells what all the cargo is, where the ship has been, and all the information that the government has asked for. Very importantly, within the last year, CBP has taken this regime to a much more significant step. It's a regulation called 10+2. What it basically means is now that the DHS is getting 10 additional data elements, not just from the ocean carrier, but from the importer in the U.S., 10 additional data elements that move up the supply chain Rob talked about, so that the government actually has much greater insight into what's coming, who's causing the goods to come, who's buying them, who's selling them, where was this container stuffed, who manufactured the goods, a whole list of data. Now, that was an inconvenience to the importing community, which wasn't all that wild about that. However, it fundamentally advanced the objective and the strategy that the government has embraced, which is risk assessment. If you're going to do risk assessment, you need good information to work from, and this has moved the maritime sector out quite a bit in front of, frankly, some other sectors, and we think the government is doing a very fine job of implementing it. The other thing that has to happen is every ship has a vessel security plan. It's boarded by the Coast Guard. In addition, every port facility we call has to meet international specifications, and those are also reviewed by an international team of Coast Guard experts that go around the world checking those international ports. Kurt, overseeing the U.S. port and America's ports, can comment on that. But really what we're talking about is a regime that covers the people, covers the ships, and covers the cargo with as much advanced information to the government as we can possibly give them.
Thank you. Kurt.
Thanks, Rob. Well, certainly ports are a critical aspect of our international border, but as both Todd and Chris have talked about, they're also a vital link in our international trade. And essentially, 99% of all of our overseas trade flows through our seaports. And that international trade is becoming more and more important to our economy and our gross domestic product. Right now, that international trade accounts for over a quarter of our gross domestic product in this country. And over the last several years, exports out of this country have accounted for over a third of the economic growth that we have seen over the last few years. Clearly, securing our ports is critical to protecting our borders, but also our citizens, as well as our economy. And port security is a responsibility that's shared, as both Todd and Chris talked about, between the federal government, Department of Homeland Security, and the various federal agencies within DHS, public port authorities like our membership, and private industry, whether they be steamship lines, terminal operators, and the shippers, importers, exporters, et cetera. There's been a great deal of collaboration and cooperation since 9/11 on improving the security of that entire maritime transportation sector, whether it be at the ports, the cargo en route, et cetera. There's been a lot of enhancements that have been implemented in terms of at the port facilities, but there's been a lot of hardening of the port facilities in terms of perimeter security, access controls. Transportation worker identification credential is now up and running. There are maritime security plans in place. Coast Guard has done a lot, as Chris has talked about, in terms of vessel security, CBP on cargo security. One of the other things that's been very valuable, and Secretary Lute referenced it this morning when she was talking about grants, we have a port security grant program where the federal government provides some help to the local public port authorities to make these enhancements at their facilities. And that's something that's been very valuable, very beneficial, and something that we think is important to be continued. Kind of as in terms of where we are now and some of the issues we think are particularly timely to be addressing in a greater degree moving forward. First is the risks from small vessels and the security, something along the lines of an attack on the USS Cole several years ago. There's certainly a lot of concern and potential for that, and that's one of the areas we think there does need to be greater attention. We understand there will be something coming out shortly in terms of some implementation of a small vessel security program. Also, Chris talked about the supply chain security. We do think there needs to be a greater supply commonality and international agreements in terms of standards for minimum levels of supply chain security, literally from the point of manufacture to the point of delivery in the United States. Another thing is related to protocols. If, in fact, right now, Customs would identify a shipment that they're concerned about potentially having a weapon of mass destruction or other suspect cargo, the protocols for how they handle that, how they transit that either from the port to either a containment area, inspection area, et cetera. In some cases, that's currently moving along local city streets or whatever. So we think there some protocols should be in place regarding that process if there is a shipment of potential concern. And as I mentioned, there's been a lot done in terms of the prevention of an incident within maritime security, but we think there should be a greater attention at this point in terms of resiliency and continuity of operations. If there's an incident or in the case of a natural disaster, that particularly in case of a terrorist incident, that there not be a total shutdown of the maritime and port system, similar to what happened in aviation on 9/11. And also getting essential services in that port back in operation as quickly as possible. Some of the lessons learned we saw in Katrina and Ike, the hurricanes affecting primarily ports in Louisiana and Mississippi, as well as then Galveston for Hurricane Ike, was that in many cases the port facility was seen as a relatively low priority in terms of getting power, et cetera, back up, and not necessarily recognizing the significant impact to the economy. It was also important for the local communities like New Orleans and Galveston to allow their people to be able to get back to work, start earning income again, and get those cities back. So we think that resiliency is also something we should take a further look at.
Thank you, Kurt. And by the way, also thank you for bringing up small vessel security, because I know that's a big concern for Homeland Security right now. What I want to go to first is, I know that everyone on the panel brought up the idea of international cooperation and imports coming in from other countries. And I'm wondering, since the federal government has been looking at that particular aspect of maritime security, how has the international community reacted? Has there been the level of cooperation that CBP, for example, would be looking for?
Yes. Right after 9/11 in 2002, CBP began to implement what was known as the Container Security Initiative. And under this program, what we do is we station CBP officers, investigators with immigration and customs enforcement, as well as some intelligence specialists overseas in foreign seaports to look at and identify the highest risk cargo before it comes to the United States. The program expanded very quickly in the early 2000s. We are at 58 locations around the world in 32 countries. And as we approached each of those nations to engage with us on the Container Security Initiative, had a very warm, very receptive attitude towards us. We were able to implement declarations of principles very quickly. We were able to get our officers stationed overseas very quickly. And the international community had a great deal at stake. If there is an incident in a foreign seaport or in a maritime supply chain, as Kurt mentioned, we need to be able to quickly reestablish those trade lanes, have business resumption protocols in place. The Container Security Initiative gives us that confidence that we can have the highest risk cargo looked at while we continue to allow the rest of the trade to continue to flow through that trade lane. So we feel the Container Security Initiative is a good example of the cooperative relationship we have with, again, these 32 countries around the world. Last year we conducted 52,000 examinations overseas. That's 52,000 of the highest risk containers that were destined for the United States were looked at before they were put on a vessel coming to the United States. 9 years ago, none of that was happening. 9 years ago, the first time we had the information, the first time we conducted the inspection when it was at our port limits, that's not a position we want to be in today. So I think the CSI program is a very good example of how the international community embraced a supply chain security program early on.
And Kurt, Kurt, did you have
I was
something?
just going to mention, related to Todd's comments, that our association, in addition to representing U.S. ports, also represents the ports throughout the hemisphere. So our non-U.S. members had obviously a great deal of interest in knowing what would be expected and required at their ports, and we've had regular ongoing correspondence with Todd and the various other aspects within Homeland Security to make sure that those, at least the ports in the hemisphere, are aware of what is necessary and required at those ports, and related also to the 100% scanning issue that Todd mentioned in his remarks.
Well, and Kurt and Chris, in the aviation sector, after 9/11, and I think you particularly saw this highlighted after the Christmas Day attempt, there was a lot of talk of international standards of airport security. Have you seen other countries react similarly towards maritime security in trying to adopt the same sort of programs and standards that the U.S. is doing? Are they as concerned about maritime attacks as we are?
At a vessel security level and at a port security level, I would say yes. There is an international ISPIS code, international security for ports and vessels that the IMO, International Maritime Organization, developed, which is widely respected and pretty consistently enforced across the board. I think the big difference is in the cargo security regimes. Todd described the program the U.S. government uses, and I think the U.S. government gets very good marks for both its outreach, its effectiveness, and its cooperation abroad. And those 52,000 boxes he's talking about having inspected before they're put on a ship is exactly what the industry wants to see. Let's check it out before there's any, you put it on a ship. I think other countries struggle with the cargo security piece more, though. And it's for a variety of factors. Some customs authorities view themselves as revenue agencies and not security agencies. So to expect them to behave the way CBP behaves in the Department of Homeland Security in the U.S. is a bit of a stretch. The EU right now is putting together its own advanced documentation requirements, kind of like our 24-hour rule. It's struggling with that. It is, its data elements will be more restricted. Its coordination amongst the 27 EU member states is more difficult. So there are challenges in other governments that I would say CBP still sets the model for, I think, effectiveness on how to do it. That's the cargo.
Well, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because I know recently in Congress and some industry sources have been saying that CBP has gone Customs and Border Protection has gone too far towards the security field and has moved a bit away from the its trade facilitation role. And I know the newly appointed head of CBP, Alan Burson, has said he wants to sort of look at that balance. And so my question to Todd is, where would you see CBP going with that? And to Chris and to Kurt, where would you like to see CBP go with that?
Well, I think every time we hear the criticism that CBP has not been engaged enough on the trade facilitation, I think it's important to remember where we were immediately after 9/11, and the security measures that we put in place very quickly were absolutely essential to preventing something further from happening. I think now that we are several years into it, we can take a look at those programs as they've matured and make sure there is a trade facilitation component that comes with it. If we look again at that CSI example, those 52,000 containers examined overseas, they are not re-examined when they come here. Okay, so we're not getting double exams, there's not a double delay, and more importantly, those exams are examined overseas by the host government at no charge to the U.S. importer. If those examinations are conducted in a U.S. seaport, there are fees that are associated with those examinations. So certain security programs can add a trade facilitation component. I think we do offer trade facilitation in many of our programs. The CTPAT, the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism program, is another fine example. Under that program, the importers that voluntarily adopt stricter security measures throughout their supply chain receive fewer inspections, 5 times fewer inspections of their cargo when it arrives at the U.S. seaport. So that is a significant savings for them and part of that. So I think the challenge is to make sure our security programs do offer greater facilitation, and now that these programs have matured with a new commissioner coming in, I think it's a good opportunity to take a fresh look at those programs and see if there's further trade facilitation that can be delivered upon.
My own view is that I think it's a bit of a bad knock to criticize CBP for not doing enough for trade facilitation. There clearly is low-risk cargo that ought to go through the system quickly. As an example, if BMW is sending parts to its BMW manufacturing plant in Spartanburg, South Carolina, going through the Port of Charleston, their CTPAT customers, the CTPAT carriers, that should move quickly and does. But facilitation is a two-way street, which is if you want to convince the government that your cargo is low risk and being handled in a proper manner, you have to give the government certain things too. If you want to be in CTPAT, that's a plus. If you want them to understand your supply chain, you have to give them this 10+2 data so that they have better insight into it. So it was a cost, it was an expense, it was a process that a lot of people had resistance embracing. But I think the steps that are being taken now actually will facilitate trade facilitation. At the same time, it doesn't take away anything the government needs to make sure that high-risk cargo is in fact stopped. Because we always want to keep in mind that the point here is the security regime. We want the low-risk cargo to go through the high-risk stuff. It's going to have to face the fact that it's going to be subjected to some steps that the lowest cargo does not have to face.
And I would agree with Chris that certainly the ports, I think general experience with CBP in that process has been very, very positive. I think there was some uncertainty when there was the determination that they were going to be putting radiation portal monitors in essentially all of our container facilities, and to have all of the containers move through those monitors prior to exiting the facilities. But again, working with the port authorities, the terminal operators, in terms of the operations of those facilities, I think certainly the experience has been that it's not had any significant impact in terms of port operations. One of the things we think relative to that is important is as CBP starts looking at the next generation of whether it's radiation monitors or density scanning, et cetera, that again, that cooperation, that collaboration with the industry continues so that those new monitors, scanners, et cetera, again, fit within the operational structure of the system. Kind of similar to the panel before, talking about the aviation security and the full body scanners, et cetera, the same type of thing, but certainly our experience to date has been, I think, very, very positive.
I want to go to technology in a second, but first I want to, Todd brought up the Container Security Initiative, and as I understand it, that along with the Secure Freight Initiative and CTPAT, which you're going to have to help me with the acronym for that, are looking at about a $78 million total budget reduction according to the President's recommendation, and CBP has said that they are looking to reevaluate those programs, all of which are sort of tasked with putting staff in foreign countries or certifying foreign actors to secure cargo before it ships. And I'm wondering, what is CBP looking at when it comes to reevaluating those?
Sure. Actually, as the programs have matured, we've taken a step back and looked and seen how we have achieved those initial objectives of identifying the high-risk cargo, working with the trade, in light of the advancements that we have made in terms of advanced data, the technology that's deployed at our ports, other efforts in the intelligence community. Can we continue to do these same programs but streamline them a little bit? If we look at our Container Security Initiative, right after 9/11 in 2002, when we started deploying the officers overseas, we did not receive the level or the systems generated advanced information that we receive today. We talked about the manifest information, the 24-hour rule, having that prior to loading. Back in 2001 and early 2002, we didn't have any of that. So the only way we gained visibility as to what was going on that ship before it was loaded on the ship were to have officers stationed overseas in that seaport. Now, if we jump ahead to 2002, the Trade Act was passed, the 24-hour rule, giving us more advanced information. The importer security filing, the 10+2 that Chris mentioned, is now in place. We have a great deal of visibility now into that cargo, and we can target that cargo basically from any system, any computer system in the country. We no longer have to have officers on the ground, 10 officers in Hong Kong, to look and identify the highest risk cargo. We can more effectively and more cost efficiently target that cargo from our National Targeting Center in Northern Virginia and only have enough officers remaining in country to actually do the exams. So if we take Hong Kong as an example, we had 12 officers overseas in Hong Kong to go through the data, identify the high-risk cargo, and then participate with Hong Kong Customs and Excise to look at those shipments. Now we have 4 officers in Hong Kong. The other 8 officers are still doing the targeting work, but we're doing it from the United States, where it's much more cheaper to do that than having bodies overseas, and we're still conducting the same level of inspections along with our officers and Hong Kong Customs. So as the Container Security Initiative has matured, we've looked at the targeting aspect, and it's really no longer necessary to have people sitting behind a computer monitor in Bremerhaven when they can sit behind the same computer monitor in Northern Virginia at a third of the cost, yet we keep enough officers overseas to still do the examinations, which really is the key to this. So in one way, the maturity of the program has allowed us to realize some cost savings now. Similarly, with the CTPAT program, we had very strong budgets. That's, again, the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism program. We had very strong budgets in the early years as we were increasing and building the program. As we were adding more staff, we were building offices. It's very costly to create new offices. We now have 7 field offices around the country. That is meeting our needs. We have no longer a need to expand into additional offices. So the money that was associated with the build out of that program can be scaled back some. That's really where we are. So in all of the programs that we have today, in CSI and CTPAT, despite the reduction in the budget, we will still be at all 58 seaports for CTPAT, for CSI. We will still be conducting the overseas validations as part of CTPAT. And I believe to the trade community, the shift of the personnel there really will be transparent to what's taking place.
Now, onto to technology, and just like aviation screening technology, maritime has certainly faced its challenges. Among them, I don't know how many people in our audience are familiar with this, but bananas and kitty litter were a headache at first because for radiation monitors, both give off a radioactive signature. And I know that the technology has gone well beyond filtering that out, but what are the challenges that are ahead? And from an industry standpoint, I know when it comes to radiation detection and identification screening, one of the sort of frustrations has been how quickly can you get it through? Because while you're screening, I've got trucks I have to load. Is industry satisfied at the pace of technology at this point? Whoever wants to take it first.
Well, perhaps I could set the stage a little bit for where we are with the radiation screening and then turn it over to Kurt and to Chris to talk about the industry impacts. But at 9/11, we did not have any radiation detection portal monitors at our ports of entry. So all the cargo was coming in was not being screened. In October of 2002, we deployed our first radiation portal monitor up in Detroit. Today, we have over 1,400 radiation portal monitors deployed around the country. 100% of the trucks and 100% of the cars coming in from Canada are screened for radiation. 100% of the trucks, 100% of the cars coming in from Mexico are screened for radiation, and 99.4% of the maritime, the containerized maritime cargo entering our seaports is screened for radiation. So I think that's a very positive story as to where we are. 485 million conveyances have been scanned since we began deploying these radiation portal monitors in 2002, and we have resolved 2.7 million radiation alarms. The comments about the unable to distinguish between the kitty litter and the granite and things of that nature, we have to look at the technology that we have out there. The radiation portal monitors that are in the seaports is basically one of a 2-piece set. That piece, the radiation portal monitor, only detects radiation. It says you have something that's lighting up that's radioactive. Our officers then follow behind it with another device known as a radiation isotope identification device, or a RID unit, that tells us what type of radiation. So you always hear the sound bites that we can't distinguish between the kitty litter and the threat, and that's not accurate. The first piece of equipment triggers it, tells us we have radiation. We come alongside with the second piece of equipment that tells us what type of radiation. Is it naturally occurring? Is it an industrial isotope? Is it a medical isotope? Is it something that is common in industry, or does it pose a threat? So we have a 2-technology process, if you will, presently. The next generation of radiation portal monitors, the advanced spectroscopic portals, do all of that in one swoop. So you have one piece of equipment that detects and identifies, whereas today we have 2 pieces of equipment, one to detect, then to follow up with it to identify. So that's kind of the context of what we see. As Kurt mentioned, when we began deploying the radiation portal monitors, we made sure we had good discussions with the stakeholders in the seaports to determine where was the best placement of this equipment so it would not negatively impact the throughputs and the efficiencies in the seaports. And I think by and large, we've been able to achieve that through the dialogue that we established with the trade community right from the start.
I would say in terms of the false positives is something I think, I think with increasingly improving technology, we'll address that to a significant larger degree. Certainly from a perspective of, say, the longshoremen or the workers at the port facilities themselves, there were issues and uncertainties. If there was a positive reading, should the port, should that facility be closer to the workers leave? I think there was a lot of uncertainty and probably certainly early on some level of a lack of a comfort level in terms of if I'm a worker, should I be here if in fact they're having a positive? So I think those additional ways of testing what that initial positive reading in fact was have gone a long way to resolving that. One of the things I mentioned in my opening, though, is if in fact through a scan there is a determination that they believe there is a suspect cargo or a suspect shipment, then what do you do? And whether there are protocols in place for how do you handle that? Are there containment facilities in terms of shielding, encasing, et cetera? I think that's something that still needs to be pursued.
We've talked mostly about customs and maritime trade security. I want to also look at the Coast Guard because they're a major component of maritime security, and you have the Government Accountability Office, many members of Congress, and observers in the private sector saying this is an agency that is overtaxed to the extent that it may have trouble fulfilling both its maritime security duties, its homeland security duties, and its vessel safety duties. And I'm just wondering, this is something that while a lot of people talk about it, no one seems to have come up with a solution. And some have said it's just as simple as double their budget. I mean, Chris, I see you nodding. I mean, where do you see this going?
Well, the Coast Guard has long advocated that it gets actual strength from its multi-mission tasking, so that it does search and rescue, it does fisheries law enforcement, it does maritime safety, it does maritime security, it does port security, it does vessel inspections.
Oil cleanup?
Oil spill cleanup. I think what happens is that while there's general broad support for the Coast Guard and its multi-mission focus, it does consistently get a difficult time in terms of having its budget needs met. It really comes into play in a year like today when you had massive deployments to deal with Haiti and followed on with the Deepwater Horizon situation. It pulls them in a direction that really can play havoc with them. So, I mean, I think the appropriators understand that. I think that message has been delivered, but clearly their fleet needs substantial improvements and upgrading, and it's something that has not got a good solution at this point.
Well, while this doesn't fall specifically into domestic maritime security, the Coast Guard's been involved in training for protection against Somali pirates, and a lot of people from the military and the Coast Guard side have said this is something where the private sector needs to adopt its own standards to prevent piracy, saying, if you set your vessel up so that a pirate has difficulty attacking it, it dramatically decreases your chance of being attacked. Do you see the private sector responding to that?
Yes, and it's true that you can set your vessel up to lower the risk profile. It's difficult to eliminate the risk profile. The liner shipping or container shipping segment has a low risk profile because our ships tend to be faster and they have higher freeboard, so it's more difficult for the pirates to get on board, who tend to favor going after slower ships with low freeboard. Yesterday, the Somali pirates captured a Singaporean tanker again. So this is an ongoing threat in the region. I think the Coast Guard has been very helpful. They've worked very closely with the U.S. flag operators. They've worked with other governments, as has the U.S. Navy. But kind of reflecting on Admiral Mullen's speech last night, piracy is really viewed as the U.S. government as a problem for U.S. vessels and our commerce, which sometimes is at risk, but it's not a serious national threat that requires full naval mobilization. It's a shared international obligation. However, all of this piracy is originating because of a failed state in Somalia. And when you get into the other risks that are being identified in Somalia, failed states supporting terrorism, et cetera, obviously something needs to be done on the land side in Somalia if we're going to fix the piracy problem and the other risks that are emerging from Somalia.
Well, let's talk about serious threats to the U.S. I know after 9/11, the single biggest priority in the maritime sector seemed to be prevent a weapon of mass destruction from coming over on a ship. I'm wondering, in that specific area, how much progress has the U.S. made? Todd, I think I'll start with.
I think in the terms of the programs that CBP has put forth, the advanced information that we had none before, the radiation portal monitors at our ports of entry, the deployment of our officers overseas to identify the high-risk cargo, the working with industry to secure the supply chain from point of stuffing forward. I think each of those programs has been very beneficial to help secure the overall supply chain. We look at what other government agencies have done, the Department of Energy, through their megaports program, where they are deploying the radiation portal monitors to overseas seaports. We look at what the Coast Guard has done. Chris mentioned the International Ship and Port Security Code, the effectiveness that has had to secure foreign ports as well as the terminals and things of that nature. I think we have a very good story to tell as to the progress that we've made. I think each of these layers makes it more difficult for the adversary to claim success or to achieve victory by using the maritime route to smuggle in the box. I mean, the adversary is very risk adverse, as you all know. If they feel there's a stronger likelihood of detection, they will move on to a lesser pathway, if you will. I think all of the layers that we've put in place, they always make a comment that government has to be right 100% of the time, but the terrorist only has to be right. I look at that a little bit differently. I mean, the terrorist has to be right in the advanced information that comes to CBP. Terrorist has to be right in how the container is loaded, not to trigger some interest from the overseas authorities or our trade community partners. They have to be right in the supply chain that they choose to try to compromise. They have to make sure it hasn't been selected for examination overseas. It has to get through a radiation portal monitor in the U.S. So I think the complementary layers that we have built really makes it much, much more difficult to achieve victory in the maritime route on a containerized, in a containerized shipment, and that they're probably looking at other means to achieve that victory.
And Rob, another aspect of the container is for a terrorist to use it, they have to surrender operational control, which has not been their modus operandi, but also reflects back to the point you raised, which is why small boat threat is something still that the Coast Guard is struggling with a great deal, because they're presumably operational control conceivably could be something that they could maintain.
Absolutely, and as the Coast Guard has defined it, small boats aren't nearly as regulated in the United States as in some other countries. There's a big concern that one of these could be used as an improvised explosive device, even without a serious payload, that it could, for example, attack some sort of freighter carrying hazardous cargo. Kurt, I want to, we've been talking about detection at ports, and I'm wondering if you could talk about whether the operational model at U.S. ports has fundamentally changed since September 11th and since CBP and the Coast Guard have taken a really serious look at maritime supply chain and shipping security.
Clearly, I think the focus and priorities of the public port authorities and then their stakeholders has changed dramatically, certainly since or prior to 9/11. In terms of security, it was primarily related more to cargo theft and drug interdiction, and certainly not a heavy level of focus on potential terrorist acts or weapons of mass destruction or the like. So since then, there's been a great deal of additional focus in terms of resources that have been put forward, not only at the federal level, but certainly at the local level and the Port Authority level, in terms of security enhancements, security personnel, detection systems, et cetera. So there's been a lot done to enhance the security. So certainly from an overall operational and certainly budgetary side of the operation, security has risen dramatically. From an operational standpoint, I would say it would be less so because, again, there's been a lot of, I think, good collaboration and work between the private industry, public port authorities at the local level, as well as the federal agencies to keep the facilitation of that cargo moving through the system, and not just at the ports, but throughout the transportation system efficient. Because obviously, if there are significant impediments put toward the flow of commerce, that affects our economy, and certainly then to some degree enable the terrorists to claim some level of success.
You mentioned spending, and I know this is a question for almost all security at this point, but there's sort of the issue of are we getting for the amount of money that we're putting forward, are we getting something worthwhile back in return? Which brings to the issue of should we concentrate on resiliency after an attack or preventing an initial attack? For maritime security, given it's been a significant government and private investment, do you feel that you're really getting the safety bang for your buck? Okay.
I think in certainly the early stages, there a lot of attention at the port level in terms of increasing perimeter security, access control, things like that. Again, historically, prior to 9/11 in general, there was less security or even perceived need for that level of security at a port facility. And as Chris mentioned, so I think it varies in terms of the need and the threat based on the facility, whether you're a bulk loading facility, if you're loading, say, coal or something like that, as opposed to either a container facility or a cruise ship facility where obviously you have passengers and a potential greater threat in terms of human life and et cetera. So there's been a lot of focus on that, a lot of enhancements. I think there has been a good bang for the buck in terms of those initial enhancements to increasing the basic security. At this level, in terms of the public port authorities, a lot of the increased ongoing expenses relate to operation and maintenance of that equipment, additional personnel cost that certainly one of the areas we think there should be more of a allowance in terms of the federal grants, et cetera, to cover those aspects, because those are more of some of the ongoing and I think more of the priorities now, because we've got a lot of the enhancements in place.
Okay. Chris, did you have something?
Well, I think the security investment is something we just have to do. I mean, I think what we've been asked to do as an industry by Coast Guard and by Customs has been reasonable. They've sat down and explained, here's what we need, here's why we need it, and if it makes sense to us, we say, okay, we get it. That investment is worthwhile. But I don't think you can make a distinction between investment in prevention and in one category and resiliency in another, because I think they go together. The system will be more resilient because of the investments we are presently making in prevention. The more the government understands supply chains, the more likely they are able to continue to allow commerce to flow in the event they have an incident to manage. So all of these things, I think, build off each other. I think Kurt's point is well taken, which is I don't think we've made the investment or quite know how to isolate suspect boxes in a port. If you really had something bad there, what's going to happen? I mean, we've had incidents where the Port of New York, New Jersey, it was the so-called Lemongate incident where there was a false report about some tainted lemons that had biological something on them, and it was all a commercial fraud, had no basis, but it paralyzed the ship for 8 days, and the governors couldn't make up their mind what to do. We haven't addressed that scenario as well as we should.
Well, and I'm glad you used the phrase, if an incident occurs, because unlike the aviation sector, where you have seen successful attacks and you've seen some very high-profile plots come at least close to success, the maritime sector hasn't, at least publicly, had that sort of attention. And I'm wondering, Todd, what are the investigative capabilities that are in place right now if an incident occurred to figure out who's responsible? Was a company liable?
Right, we have a great deal of resources through Immigration and Customs Enforcement, our sister agency within DHS, that actually handles the investigation. So as CBP, as the interdictors at the border, we receive, again, all that information of all the parties involved. We've got the routing of the container. We receive specific information from the carriers as to the places that container has been. So we have a great deal of forensic information available to us should something occur and should we need to backtrack to try to narrow that down. Just a comment on the last point, there has been much emphasis on the maritime and on the containerized traffic since 2001, but I'm always cautious about advocating additional layers in that environment at the expense of other areas as well. I mean, we've done so much in the maritime. We've rattled through those different programs. We've done an awful lot. I think we've got a pretty good security posture for maritime containerized cargo. We talked about small vessels. We're not so strong there. We talked about general aviation. We're not so strong there. So when we have these calls that we need to do more and more on the maritime containerized cargo side, I think it's worth the discussion to say, look at what we have done, look at other threat pathways that are not as well protected, and should some of those funding sources be directed towards those activities.
Kurt, from a port side, in case of an attack, is there any need for more in the terms of drilling and exercises to get the state, the federal, the private actors all working in coordination, so we don't end up with the type of situation that Chris is talking about, where we don't really know how to isolate a threat within a port and everything comes to a standstill?
That is necessary, and it is being done. Part of the I think one of the benefits that we've had historically, in terms of at least with the Coast Guard, is that there is a local Coast Guard captain of the port in each of the port facilities. So there's been a historic relationship and local I guess personnel that know the port, and the port certainly knows them. There, as part of the maritime area port security plans, et cetera, there are training exercises, et cetera, that take place on a regular basis. There has been, I think, a great deal. A question was asked, I think, in the first panel this morning about the interoperability of systems and in terms of the communications, et cetera. There was a great deal learned, certainly from September 11th. The World Trade Center was owned by the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. So they obviously had lessons learned and experiences in terms of the communications and interoperability and intercommunication between the various agencies. So there's been a lot of improvements in terms of the ability of those various aspects, whether it's the federal, local enforcement, local response teams, et cetera, to be able to communicate. And like I say, the exercises are part of that process on a regular basis.
But now we've talked about CBP, the Coast Guard, ICE, and certainly the Transportation Security Administration plays a role here. And these are all components of the Department of Homeland Security. And Chris, what I'm wondering, if from a shipper's perspective, has the department done any work in sort of helping to create sort of a one-stop shop for shippers to get everything, to get all the information, to get all the clearances they need? Is it any easier now that all these are rolled into one department?
We think the creation of the department has been very helpful, frankly. It's been helpful because principally it has fostered a much closer cooperative relationship between Coast Guard and CBP. They talked to each other before, but they didn't coordinate like they do now. TSA has a marginal role in maritime issues. I mean, it's working with the Coast Guard on the TWIC, the Transport Worker Identification Credential, but that's really where it is. I mean, the line agencies, the people with the boots on the ground, the systems are the Coast Guard and CBP, and it really works pretty well because CBP's got cargo, they share people, and Coast Guard's got the ports and the ships. So they coordinate pretty well together, and we have not had significant wasted time or frustrations out of that.
We brought up the term 100% cargo scanning, and Todd, I know this has been one of the, I don't know if it's fair to say a fairly substantial headache for DHS since Congress required it, but could you talk a little bit about the requirement and where CBP is heading with it right now, because there are some pretty key members of Congress who haven't been satisfied with the pace of movement.
Sure, the concept of 100% scanning first presented itself during the Safe Port Act of October of 2006. What 100% scanning refers to is that for the container itself, it has to undergo not only a scan for radiation, but an image as well as to what's inside the context. You marry up the two, you have the image, you have the radiation. The reason you need to subject the box to both types of technology is that if you have a shielded nuclear material, it will not emit radiation, it can defeat the radiation portal monitors. That's why you come along behind it with the X-ray equipment, because that will show you a shielded device inside the box. So you have to have the two pieces of equipment to have a confidence level that that box does not pose a threat. The Safe Port Act said, go out and pilot, CBP, go out and pilot this concept of subjecting all of the boxes to that type of screening or scanning arrangement at 3 locations. We deployed pilot locations in Qasim, Pakistan, in Puerto Cortez, Honduras, and in Southampton in the UK. We also went beyond the congressional mandate of 3 locations, and we worked in 1 terminal in Hong Kong, 1 terminal in Korea, Salalah, Oman. Those are 3 very big transshipment ports. In your seaports, you basically have 2 main processes. You have gate traffic, where everything entering comes through a gate, nice fixed choke point. You can deploy your suite of technology very simply. You can scan them. We've proven that that can be done. The challenge is with transshipment cargo, where it doesn't come through that choke point. You have ship-to-ship movement, ship-to-barge, rail-to-ship, all those types of combinations that we find in the largest seaports around the world. The technology doesn't exist to allow us to address those boxes without negatively impacting the throughput and the efficiency of the terminals. So Safe Port Act said, go out and pilot this concept. We piloted it in those smaller locations. We showed it could work for gate traffic. We showed it was very problematic for transshipment. Then the 9/11 Recommendations Act came along a year later in August of 2007 and basically trumped the Safe Port Act and said, don't study the feasibility, go do it everywhere by July of 2012. That's the piece of legislation that we're currently operating under. A lot of challenges. Again, we just mentioned about the transshipment, all sorts of diplomatic issues dealing with host governments to scan these boxes, the cost. The legislation was silent as to who's going to bear the cost, not only for the equipment, but for the examinations themselves. So there's lots of challenges all the way down to environmental. When we deployed the scanning equipment and we created a center in Southampton, there was a pond behind our equipment that had some protected turtle species in it. So we had to remove everything because of the environmental issues. So you face these real life challenges when you start to deploy this out there, and the sound bite of 100% scanning sounds real nice, but there's an awful lot of challenges behind it. What CBP has done and what the Secretary has embraced is look at strategic locations where it makes sense to overcome the challenges, to overcome the costs, where that additional data really benefits us. Qasim, Pakistan, where we currently are. Karachi, Pakistan, where we're going next. Salalah, Oman, another location of strategic importance that we're currently in. A seaport in Jordan, a seaport in Kuwait, a seaport in Alexandria. We've identified certain locations of strategic importance where we believe the 100% scanning makes sense, and that is our long-term strategy going forward, or our next round of deployments. The Secretary, before the Congress in December of 2009 at a hearing, she made it clear that she will use the 2-year extensions that are provided for under the legislation to push the deadline back from July of 2012 to July of 2014. So we're operating under a risk management approach, deploy this type of equipment into the most strategic, important locations, but don't deploy it everywhere for right now. Use the extensions to address the legislation.
And I know the usage of those extensions has led to questions about whether or not the department actually takes this requirement seriously and is planning to go through with it. It sounds like you're saying that it does.
We had actually determined that Qasim, Pakistan would be a good place for this 100% scanning concept 9 months before the Safe Port Act ever came along and did it. When we were under our container security initiative, we were looking at ports in the world that we wanted to be. Qasim, Pakistan was one of those ports. However, because of the risk to U.S. personnel stationed abroad in that part of the country, we couldn't have officers stationed overseas along the CSI model that we had. So we looked at a different way where technology can do things. What we have in Qasim is the containers come through a specialized facility that Pakistan Customs built for us that runs it with us. They scan the containers for the X-ray images again, as well as the radiation. They transmit all those data to our National Targeting Center in Northern Virginia, where a CBP officer in real time analyzes and makes the assessment if that box poses a threat or not. The compound in Qasim, Pakistan has CCTV cameras throughout it. If we require the Pakistanis to actually do a physical inspection of that box, we watch it as it's being done from Northern Virginia. So we have a pretty good program with Qasim, Pakistan, and again, that was before the Safe Port Act came along and said do it. So from the position of CBP, we believe that clearly there are high-risk places in the world that we should be, where perhaps personnel on the ground is not an option, and that 100% scanning model using the remote technology like we've seen in Pakistan makes a lot of sense.
Okay. I think we're going to open it up to audience questions now. If you could please just wait for the microphone to come your way. I see we have one in the back.
While he's getting the microphone, Rob, the only thing I would just add, Todd gave an excellent description of the 100% issue. But one of the things he encounters with other governments is the argumentation that the U.S. wants it all its way, and we do nothing on our exports. So when we talk to another foreign government about this 100%, they would say, well, what about you? And because we don't do any of that kind of treatment on our exports, it is something that the CBP folks have to deal with in developing these bilateral relationships. You need to do 100%.
Well, now, is that a demand you see from foreign countries, or is that kind of well, why should we give it to you? You don't give it to. I mean, is anyone seriously saying we want to see
It's
that?
both.
Okay. And are we going to see anything like that, Todd?
Well, we're not pushing that within the U.S. seaports. I mean, a lot of challenges to do that again, and we're just adopting the model where we're going to place the equipment in some high-risk locations around the world.
My name's Al Cannon. I'm the sheriff of Charleston County. Chris, I appreciate your positive comments about South Carolina. These days, we'll take any we can get. One of the elements, and I kind of wish I'd been sitting up there with you guys, we're greatly involved in port security, and I'd encourage anybody in the audience that's interested, come to Charleston. The Safe Ports Act mandated that interagency operations centers be stood up around the country at ports. Charleston is the only one that has one of those in place. And what that mandates, for example, is that the CBP targeting element is co-located with the Coast Guard sector. We have a unified command there that meets on a daily basis, assigns various taskings, which might include Coast Guardsmen or CBP or ICE in some instances, going out on the sheriff's office boat to conduct their various tasks. But they have a menu, drop-down menu of all sorts of resources that are available to go to the various taskings that are required. We developed in Project Seahawk a data mining system that the Coast Guard has adopted. They call Watchkeeper. But bringing folks together in that environment serves as a force multiplier for everybody. And Kurt, going to one of the points you made, one of the capabilities we've developed from a security perspective, we can use with the Coast Guard to ensure that a channel is open after a hurricane. So we can very speedily make those kinds of determinations that directly impact continuity and those kinds of issues. But Charleston has done a great deal, and it's a significant port in the sense not only of containers, but 40% of the material used in the Middle East is shipped out of there. Of course, the air base flies a lot out of there, so there's a lot of similar issues there that we face in a relatively small area. But that local and state involvement is a critical piece of what you're talking about here in terms of port security. And that is one of the things about the port security project in Charleston that got some many rave reviews for everybody that visited there, including the Secretary Napolitano on a recent tour. I didn't really have a question.
Well, Nick, Well, in that case, actually, let me just ask one of Todd. I mean, are you going to see those sorts of programs expand?
Yeah, absolutely. What we have with Seahawk, and as the sheriff indicated, really goes beyond what we see in other seaports where we have CBP and the Coast Guard working together, targeting jointly, doing boardings together jointly. Seahawk really brings in that local and state element, which goes beyond just the federal players, which we have in a lot of other seaports. So it's been a success in many regards. It really is a model that can be adopted if the funding is there. It's really, as the sheriff said, it really is to be touted as an example of the way the federal, the state, and the local can come together for seaport security.
And the gray shirt there.
My name is Kent Blackmer, and I'm representing the local transit system here. My question is in light of what's happening in the Gulf now, is there security measures in place to protect other drilling rigs that could be a tremendous target for terrorists?
And I'll actually expand that beyond drilling rigs to also go to tankers and carriers, I know, for both natural gas and oil.
Really, this is more in the Coast Guard domain, but what I can say from our experiences in relationship with CBP is that there are certain measures that are taken based on the cargo, liquefied natural gas vessels and things of that nature. I know there is interest in securing the oil tankers, the Louisiana offshore oil platform loop, where about a third of the oil coming into the country comes through that one facility. Very significant asset out there. So I know that there is that awareness, and I know Coast Guard and others have taken measures to protect those.
And the question also raises an interesting point of what can constitute damage. And I know, Kurt, I'm just wondering if ports are looking beyond sort of an attack that can cause something to blow up to something that could, for example, cause a major ecological catastrophe.
Well, I think those various sorts of scenarios are things to look at in terms of the specific with the spill. To date, thankfully, all of the ports in the Gulf area have been able to be maintained to be open, and they did establish essentially decontamination stations if there were any vessels that had transited through the oil spill and had any sort of oil sheen on their hulls, that before they would enter a harbor or port, that they would have some decontamination processes done. That to date has been very few vessels that have required that. But in terms of the ecological damage, one of the things that's a potential concern related to the oil spill is the contamination of potential sediments in terms of the dredging that's required for many of those Gulf ports to be able to be maintained at their authorized depths and widths, and material that may well have been non-contaminated and be able to be used for beach nourishment or various other aspects of disposal or utilization potentially could be contaminated through this process, and that's something that's of concern to.
So if I understand what you're saying, the oil residue can sink to the bottom and then get churned up through dredging?
No, it would be a case where potentially the oil residue could contaminate sediment that's on the bottom of the channel, and then when the dredging operation takes place, sediment that previously had been non-contaminated and could be utilized for beneficial uses may have contaminants in them that would prohibit that beneficial use and also would be more restrictive in terms of where that.
So you get a very long-term danger there. I saw a hand in the middle, right there.
Tom Graham, Lightbridge Corporation. I'd just like to ask what happened. I thought that was very reassuring, the presentation on imaging and radiation detection followed by X-ray. But what happens if there's a cargo container, let's say, in Pakistan? You don't detect any radiation, but you do see something with the X-ray that shows there's a shielded device. If it's a softball-sized device or softball-sized item containing nuclear explosive material, is that container then dismantled when it gets to the U.S.? And of course, if it's a larger one, it could be an explosive device that could be detonated in the harbor. So I'm just wondering what happens when you have a reading like that?
Sure. Any threats that are identified overseas are resolved overseas. So before it's put on the ship, if it was the example of Pakistan, the container would be stripped out by the Pakistani authorities and resolved before we ever gave it the all clear to be loaded onto a vessel coming here. So all those threats are addressed overseas. To your point about the softball size radioactive materials, when you look at the types of imaging equipment that's now being deployed, the high energy systems, they have very strong penetration, very good clarity. When you look at what was deployed prior to 9/11, we had CBP had 64, former U.S. Customs had 64 of these large X-ray systems deployed mostly along the southwest border, and they were intended to locate narcotics. They were built to identify a 500-pound marijuana shipment. So that was the type of anomaly that the systems back then were looking for. Today, because of the threat, they're identified just like that. You said a softball, Coke can size item could be the threat. The equipment that's out there today has come so far. When you see how deep the penetration gets, the clarity of the images that are there, it really is impressive the progress that the industry has made in moving in that direction.
And sir, I don't want to make you feel any less reassured, but Todd, I was going to ask you about, you mentioned the advanced
Advanced spectroscopic portals.
Thank you. Or the ASP program. I know that this
Yes.
is something that has encountered some setbacks, including problems with false positives and I believe test shipments that went through without finding anything. Where is that program right now?
Right, the Advanced Spectroscopic Portal is run by the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, DNDO, within the Department of Homeland Security. Through several rounds of testing, the initial objective was to replace all of the current radiation portals in the ports. Again, those ones that just detect, then we have to come along and identify with another piece of equipment. Going to replace all of those with this ASP that would do it all in one shot. Several rounds of testing have proven or demonstrated that that technology has not come as far along as we had hoped. So right now, the Secretary has scaled back the decision to deploy those in a primary venue, the 1,400 that are out there, and just focus on a secondary, focus on a increased screening once a container is identified for risk. So that's a good example of the technology that has matured some, but it hasn't come quite far enough yet. I'm sure over the next couple of years, as that technology continues to develop, that equipment will get stronger. Much like we saw with the X-ray systems over time, the technology will catch up and play an even greater role. Yeah.
Other questions?
I think everybody's hungry.
It's definitely a possibility. Actually, I think I'm out of them all. So how far we're a little bit ahead of our 12:45 endpoint, but I don't think that Aspen would be arguing with that. So we're going to wrap it up. Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you very much to our panel.